the top stories of the news. PDP's Atiku Abubakar arrives the presidential election petition court. President Muhammadu Buhari to induct new warships, gunboats and helicopters for the Nigerian Navy on May 22. On the foreign scene, former U.S. President Trump jokes about sexual abuse verdict, repeats election falsehoods. Good afternoon and welcome to Spring News at 12 on Western Spring Television. My name is Damilola Raphael. Former Vice President Atiku Abubakar has arrived at the Presidential Election Petition Court in Abuja. The former Vice President is in court for the pre-hearing session of his petition against the victory of the President-elect Bola Tinubu during the February 25 presidential election. Atiku had on May 8 filed an application for an order to allow the live coverage of the daily court proceedings on the case brought against the president-elect, which started on Monday. Arriving at the Court of Appeal Abuja, the venue for the tribunal sitting this morning, the former vice president was accompanied by former governors Lael Imoke of Cross River, Babangida Aliyu of Niger, Boni Haruna of Adamawa, among other dignitaries. The Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives, Idris Wase, has rejected his party's zoning of the office of the Speaker of the yet-to-be-inaugurated 10th National Assembly to Tajuddin Abbas from the Northwest. Wase, who led other aggrieved members of the House to the national headquarters of the All Progressives Congress in Abuja, explained that the zoning of the office of the Speaker to the Northwest without due consultation is against the spirit of fairness and equity. The aggrieved APC members in a meeting with the APC leadership insisted that the zoning arrangement must be revisited in the overall interest of the party. 5 of the aspirants, including Yusuf Gaji, were at the meeting and they want the party to do something about the situation to avoid past experiences.
What makes you think that what you have done will stand the test of time? I don't know if it's on political lineage. I think I'm a better person in terms of leaders of Aswaji family because I came under AC from 2007 until when we had the merger. I've served you as deputy leader of the House. I'm now serving you as deputy speaker of the House of Representatives. If you are going to do anything, what makes you think that we're not qualified?
We are not against our leaders. But if we should sit down and say, okay, sit among yourself and pick somebody you know you can work with, it's easy. It's easy. But the person the speaker is trying to even pick, there are some of our colleagues in the same assembly that even don't know him, sir.
I plead with you in good conscience to give us a little time to take a good and better look at your presentation and open our ears and eyes the more.
Senators-elect from the North Central geopolitical zone have rejected the zoning arrangement proposed by the leadership of the All Progressives Congress for principal positions in the 10th National Assembly. In its zoning formula announced on Monday, the APC endorsed Senator Godswill Akpabio from the South-South for Senate President and Senator Barau Jibrin from the Northwest for the post of Deputy Senate President. However, the North Central Caucus Senators-elect in a letter yesterday rejected the arrangement, saying it was an open denial of their rights and privileges. The letter, which was titled Resolution of the North Central Caucus of the 10th Senate on NAS leadership zoning, was signed by 18 senators-elect from different political parties. The governor of Bayelsa State, Oyedere, has urged the Nigerian army to be professional and neutral during the forthcoming November 11 governorship election in the state. Speaking at Government House, Yenagoa, when he hosted the General Officer Commanding GOC 6th Division of the Nigerian Army, Diri lauded the security agencies for being neutral during the 2023 general elections. The governor noted that the army and other security agencies were crucial to the sustenance of democracy if they effectively play their role. The governor also applauded the army for its support to his administration, urging them not to relent in sustaining the peace and security in the state. President Muhammadu Buhari will on May 22 induct new warships, gunboats and helicopters for the Nigerian Navy. In a statement yesterday by the NN Headquarters Chief of Policy and Plans, Saidu Garba, the president would commission 2 ships, NNS Kada and NNS Ibeno, and a recently acquired NN helicopter. Garba added that the event, slated to hold from May 19 to May 22 in Lagos, would also feature a presidential fleet review, ceremonial sailing pass exercise, combat, and aerial displays. He disclosed that during the 8-year administration of President Buhari, a total of 20 capital ships were procured for the Navy. The Federal Economic Council yesterday approved the sum of 129.8 billion naira for various projects in the Ministry of Niger Delta Affairs, particularly the mandate of the United Nations Environment Programme on Ogoni cleanup. Senior Special Assistant to the President on Media and Publicity, Garba Shehu, disclosed this to journalists after the councils presided by Vice President Yemi Osinbajo at the State House, Abuja. He said the money would cater for the second phase of the Ogoni water project and the central remediation of newly identified hydrocarbon-impacted sites. In August 2011, the United Nations Environment Programme released its environmental assessment of Ogoni land.
Approval was also given for the award for the contract for the remediation of newly identified hydrocarbon impacted sites along the shoreline of Ogoni land. And this is for about 107 billion naira. It's a big one indeed.
A federal high court sitting in Awka, Anambra State, has dismissed the suit filed by the Anambra State government challenging the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission's power to investigate its finances, describing it as factually and forensically lacking in merit. In a statement by the EFCC yesterday, the court held that the commission is well in the right of its powers under the law to carry out such investigations. The state government had approached the court presided over by Justice Nnamdi Dingba to determine whether under the federal system of government with the constitutional doctrine of separation of powers, the appropriation, disbursement, and/or administration of funds belonging to a state government is subject to investigation by the EFCC, being an agency of the federal government. The Jigawa State government has disputed the reports from National Data Health Survey (NDHS), which placed the state among the top poverty-stricken states in Nigeria. The state's deputy governor and governor-elect Umar Namadi stated this while responding to questions from newsmen shortly after he received a report of subcommittees of the Transition Committee. Mr. Namadi explained that the incumbent government under Governor Badaru Abubakar had introduced so many policies and programs to reduce the prevailing rate of poverty in the state. He stated that as a result of a series of interventions from federal, state, governments, and other partners, the level of poverty in the state has reduced and the purchasing power of people has significantly improved. He restated his commitment to continue with all the policies and programs of Governor Badaru-led administration for the development of the state. The federal government has assured Nigerians that ongoing projects will not be jettisoned by the incoming administration of the president-elect Bola Tinubu. The Minister of Water Resources, Suleiman Adamu, stated this after the Federal Executive Council meeting chaired by the Vice President Yemi Osinbajo, which lasted over 7 hours. He explained that the council continued to ratify various contracts running into billions of naira because they have sworn to work to serve Nigerians until the last day. The council approved 449.9 million naira for the development of airport master plan for 17 airports in the country. They include Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Kano, Owerri, Benin, Enugu, Maiduguri, Yola, Kaduna, Calabar, Ilorin, Sokoto, Ibadan, Jos, Akure, and Katsina airports.
We do not control the process, but when it's completed and we're still in office, we are duty-bound to bring these memos to council for council to approve. Government is a continuum. There are still a lot of memos, I can assure you, a lot of contracts that will not see the light of day in the next 1 week. We have continued since 2015 to implement projects, and we're confident that the incoming administration will do the same.
You're watching Spring News at 12 on Western Spring Television. We will be right back after this break.
The British Empire was the largest and the most powerful in the world. At its zenith, the empire embraced a quarter of the Earth's land surface and imposed her imperial majesty's rule on more than 458 million peoples across nations and continents. The empire took off with overseas possessions and trading posts established by England, spread over 3 million kilometers between 16th and early 18th century. Like previous empires, the British Empire began to crumble on its weight of overstretched territories and growing unrest in our various colonies. Today, the British Empire no longer exists. What is in place is the Commonwealth of Nations, a loose association of sovereign states which recognize the King of England as the titular head. Western Spring Television identifies the British Empire as a watershed empire in history. The Berlin Conference of 1884 defined the configuration of Africa, which hitherto existed as a continent of multiple kingdoms and empires under native rulers. The conference, otherwise referred to as Congo Conference, regulated European colonization and trade in Africa as initiated by German leader Otto von Bismarck. The Berlin Conference is often called the scramble for and partitioning of Africa, as each of the imperial powers carved separate portions of the continent for themselves without recourse to racial and cultural identities and differences. 137 years after the Berlin Conference was held, Africa remains a legitimized playground for European nations that sought to exploit its wealth and resources and manipulate its human capital to promote trades and investments of Western powers. Western Spring Television identifies the Berlin Conference as a major event in history. The Korean War of 1950 to 1953 pitched North and South Korea against each other in response to intrigues by nations beyond their border with different interests from those canvassed by the two brother nations. The Korean War had all the nuances of an external conflict induced by powers that were interested in subjugating North and South Korea. Japan had leveraged on its military power to annex Korea in 1900 and imposed a military union that did not sit well with the citizens. Japan not only lost its war of conquest against Korea, all its powers were obliterated by the effect of the World War II. The end of World War II got Korea divided into two nations along 38th parallel lines by the instrumentality of the United States of America and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. The Korean War lapsed into a Cold War when it stopped the prying eyes of external forces into the internal affairs of a nation now divided along its north and southern territories. Western Spring Television identifies the Korean War as a major event in history.
You're welcome back. We'll continue to serve you more reports at this time. The Labour Party presidential candidate during February 25 presidential election, Peter Obi, has distanced himself and his supporters from the attack on the General Overseer, Redeemed Christian Church of God, Pastor Enoch Adeboye. He said the social media attack on the cleric was part of a plot by the opposition to create confusion and bad blood. Obi, who is a former Anambra State governor, made the clarification in a series of tweets on his Twitter handle yesterday. The priest had come under heavy criticism after the pastor declared that the president-elect Bola Tinubu can fix Nigeria with God's help. But reacting to the backlash that trailed Adeboye's statement, Obi wrote, "The issue of the use of subterfuge by people masquerading as obedience to abuse and insult eminent personalities is most unacceptable." Talking business now, the Budget Office of the Federation has said Nigeria now has a limited borrowing space due to its poor debt-to-revenue ratio, stressing that trouble looms for the country if it exceeds its limits. The office issued the warning as the outgoing president, Muhammadu Buhari, wrote to the National Assembly seeking approval for a fresh $800 million loan from the World Bank. Director General of the Budget Office, Ben Akabueze, while addressing members-elect of the 10th National Assembly at their week-long induction ceremony in Abuja yesterday, pointed out that while Nigeria remains healthy with its debt-to-GDP ratio, the country is not with its debt-to-revenue ratio. He said Nigeria has of the lowest gross domestic products-to-debt ratios in the world, while the size of the federal government budget for 2023 created some excitement. The aggregate budget of all the governments in the country amounted to about 30 trillion naira, which is less than 15% in terms of ratio to GDP. He explained that a high debt service ratio, noting that once a country's debt service ratio exceeds 30%, that country is in trouble, and Nigeria is pushing towards 100%, and that tells how much trouble the nation is in. Outside Nigeria, India's imports of Russian oil rose tenfold last year, according to Indian state-controlled Lender Bank of Baroda. The figures show Asia's third-largest economy saved around $5 billion as it ramped up crude purchases from Moscow. It comes as Western countries have been cutting their imports of energy from Russia after its invasion of Ukraine. Russia has been selling energy at a discount to countries like China and India, which is the world's third-largest importer of oil. In 2021, Russian oil accounted for just 2% of India's annual crude imports. That figure now stands at almost 20%, Bank of Baroda said. Still in business, United States Attorney General Merrick Garland has authorized the first transfer of funds seized from Russian oligarchs to aid Ukraine. In a statement yesterday, Garland said the money seized from Russian oligarch Konstantin Malofeyev will go towards the war-torn country, which Russia invaded on February 24, 2022. Garland said while this represents the United States' first transfer of forfeited Russian funds for the rebuilding of Ukraine, it will not be the last. Last year, the U.S. Department of Justice charged Malofeyev with violating sanctions imposed on Russia. Prosecutors said he provided financing for Russians promoting separatism in Crimea, a peninsula the country annexed from Ukraine in 2014. On the foreign scene, an unrepentant Donald Trump held firm to past grievances at the first televised town hall of the 2024 U.S. presidential election yesterday, stressing from the moment he took the stage that he has little intention of mounting a more disciplined campaign for his third White House bid. In a contentious 70-minute broadcast, the Republican reasserted unfounded claims that the election was rigged against him, brushing aside attempts to correct the record. The former president repeated falsehoods about his 2020 election loss, revealing that he would pardon many of his supporters convicted of taking part in a January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. Trump further drew laughter from a New Hampshire audience when he mocked writer E. Jean Carroll's account of his having sexually abused her.
Back to what happened on that day. You said you weren't.
He did not say that.
He has testified that, Mr. President.
He did not say that.
But you said you weren't very involved that day. You did tell your supporters to come to Washington. You tweeted about it, about that speech that happened on the rally.
Am I allowed to say that?
When they went to the Capitol and they were breaking into the Capitol, smashing windows, injuring police officers, why did it take you 3 hours to tell them to go home?
I don't believe it did. Oh, let me pull it out. I have to pull it out. So if you look at, on January 5th, the day before, I said, please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They are truly on the side of our country. Stay peaceful. Stay peaceful. This was the day before, and this was in the form of Twitter. Now I use Truth Social. I think it's far superior, okay? I hope everybody's on Truth. If you look January 6th, this is before 2:30. I am asking for everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful. This is right after, as it was happening. But what happened is they took it down. I don't know why. I think they took it down because it was so good. They didn't like it being up there. I am asking, and we didn't know until I got it back, because now I have 90 million people waiting for me to go back, but I'm on Truth and I'm staying on Truth. Listen, I am asking for everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful. No violation. We want no violation. We want no violence. Remember, we are the party of law and order. Respect the law and our great men and women in blue. Thank you. That was at 2:30. That was very early.
Mr. President, I looked at the same timeline that you did.
No, I know, but you didn't report that. You know why? Because it was taken down. We did report it.
I was reporting that
thing. It was taken down and it wasn't.
But when it was...
In Europe, Finland's outgoing Prime Minister Sanna Marin has filed for divorce jointly with her husband of 3 years, Markus Räikkönen. The couple, in separate Instagram stories, said they were grateful for the 19 years together and their beloved daughter. Marin and Räikkönen, who until recently worked at a venture capital firm, share a 5-year-old daughter. They married in 2020 while Marin was in office dealing with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Marin and her Social Democratic Party lost Finland's election for parliament last month, trailing the right-wing National Coalition Party as well as the Nationalist Finns Party. To the Russia-Ukraine war, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has said his country needs more time to launch a much-anticipated counter-offensive against Russian forces as its military awaits the delivery of promised military aid. The expected attack could be decisive in a war, rejoining front lines that, for months, have remained unchanged. Speaking at his headquarters in Kiev, President Zelensky described combat brigades, some of which were trained by NATO countries, as being ready, but said the army still needed some things, including armored vehicles that were arriving in batches. The attack will also be a crucial test for Ukraine, eager to prove that the weapons and equipment it has received from the West can result in significant battlefield gains. In the Middle East, Israel continues with its air attacks on Gaza, while Palestinian armed groups have also launched volleys of rockets towards Israel. Israeli officials said more than 400 rockets had been fired from Gaza yesterday evening. Most were intercepted or fell in open areas in Gaza, though some did cause damage in Israel. According to the Palestinian Ministry of Health, at least 27 people have been killed in the Israeli raids on the coastal enclaves. The ministry also revealed that over 76 people have been injured, with most suffering from serious injuries. To sports now. Andy Murray's chances of being seeded for the French Open were dented yesterday when the former world's #1 lost to Fabio Fognini in the first round of the Italian Open. Just days after winning the second-tier Aix-en-Provence Challenger Tour crown, his first title since 2019 and first in clay since 2016, Murray delivered another inconsistent clay court performance in a 6-4, 4-6, 6-4 defeat by Fognini. Murray, who had been hoping to boost his world ranking with a deep run in Rome and be seeded for Roland Garros, said it had been a pretty patchy match against the Italian. Three times Grand Slam champion Murray, who also suffered early defeats in Monte Carlo and Madrid, has not played at Roland Garros since 2020 following his hip surgeries. And before we end the news, here is a recap of our top stories. Former Vice President Atiku Abubakar has arrived at the Presidential Election Petition Court in Abuja. President Muhammadu Buhari will on May 22 induct new warships, gunboats and helicopters for the Nigerian Navy. And then on the foreign scene, we brought you news that an unrepentant Donald Trump held firm to past grievances as the first televised town hall of the 2024 U.S. presidential election yesterday. You can follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Western Spring Television. You can also watch us live on our YouTube channel at Western Spring Television. That ends Spring News at 12. I am Damilola Raphael, thanking you indeed for watching and wishing you a good afternoon.